I think this is actually one of the most important topics that we're going to be discussing today, and I'm happy to be a part of the discussion. I just have to ask a question. I hated this kind of thing when I was being educated, but how many people in this room, just a show of hands, have heard of the Collaborative Committee on Ophthalmic Innovation? I see one, I see two, a couple of little scattered hands. A few people out there. You don't count. You don't count. Okay, so I would say the majority of people have no idea what this is. I have bad news for the rest of you. This may be one of the most important groups for the future of ophthalmic innovation that ever existed. And the concept of what this is will be discussed in a moment. And then we're going to go through a whole bunch of questions about it. But we're privileged to have 5 incredible panelists here. Dr. Michael Abramoff, Dr. Natalie Afshari, Dr. Jeffrey Goldberg, Dr. Daniela Ferrara, and Dr. David Myung, all of whom are participants in the Collaborative Committee on Ophthalmic Imaging. I am also a participant in this committee, as are many of the people probably still outside. But you're going to hear a little bit about what the committee is. Unfortunately, Malvina Eydelman, who we all know from the FDA, who is spearheading this, had a family emergency and was unable to attend. So David has taken on the responsibility of introducing this concept. And then we will go through some panel questions that I think you will all find incredibly important, especially if you're involved in building a company. So David.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rothman, and on behalf of my fellow amazing co-panelists and CCOI, I'd like to thank all the organizers for the opportunity to speak to you today. And again, thank you for your bearing with us and letting me speak on behalf of Dr. Eydelman. We did work together to prepare these slides to try to deliver the same message. And even though you haven't heard of CCOI, you won't forget about CCOI after today. I actually just picked that walk-up song, Don't You Forget About Me, 80s classic, so just subliminal, you don't forget. So I'll talk about it here. So I serve as the Vice President of CCOI, which stands for the Collaborative Community on Ophthalmic Innovation. I'm also a clinician scientist on faculty at Stanford and direct our Ophthalmic Innovation Program. I just want to acknowledge the fantastic leadership group that I work with at CCOI, including our president, Joel Schuman, our past president and primary founder, Mark Blumenkrantz, Dr. Michael Abramoff here, and our very distinguished board directors and advisors, including Dr. Eydelman, who's director of OHT1, Dr. Michelle Tarver, who's the director of CDRH, Emily Chu at the NEI, Michael Chang, our NEI director, Flora Lum from AAO, Mike Repka, our incoming AAO president, and Aaron Lee at the University of Washington, and Carol Shields at Wills Eye Hospital. So it's been amazing working with them. And I think the first question you all have maybe is, what is a collaborative community? And so to answer this, I am referring and deferring to the FDA website, actually. This is a screenshot of the FDA website. If you Google collaborative community, this is the website that comes up. They didn't define or think of the idea of collaborative communities, but they have taken hold of it and made it a priority. So it is addressing healthcare challenges together. I'm going to use a little bit of paraphrasing almost in some direct quotes from the FDA, from this exact site, that a collaborative community is a grassroots global effort convened by interested stakeholders that work together to solve shared challenges and achieve common goals related to the development of medical products. And they're founded on the belief that every voice should be heard and counted equally. So patients, for instance, offer a different voice than those of healthcare providers, device manufacturers, and regulators. And the collaborative communities bring together these voices with a shared purpose and platform to fill gaps in knowledge, spark innovation, and in turn help to improve public health. And so this is a kind of a flywheel diagram from the website talking about all the different stakeholders coming together. And actually it was one of their strategic priorities just before COVID to build these collaborative communities. And now CCOI is one of actually 19 now, at least that from what I can see, public-facing collaborative communities around the country. And we were one of the first, actually listed as the first one there. So it's been exciting to work on this. And our charter, our specific charter, is to convene our diverse but cohesive stakeholders with interest in ophthalmic innovation specifically. And this next paragraph here, all I have to say is that we're coming together, we're different because we're bringing everyone together to ask the hard questions, really, and to identify those roadblocks, those bottlenecks, and tackle them together, because there are many technologies out there that are sort of maybe stuck or can't quite find their way. And I think with all the input of the stakeholders, all the voices, we can make progress together and improve healthcare around the world. I want to recognize the visionary leadership of our immediate past president and really the man who made it all possible, Mark Blumenkrantz, who was our former chair, founder and co-director of our Ophthalmic Innovation Program. Under his leadership, we became one of the first collaborative communities, became a self-sustaining entity, established 501c3 nonprofit status, and implemented 6 kind of fundamental foundational working groups, which I'll tell you about, and then also partnered with 6 collaborative member professional societies. We published 7 articles, many of which were in the Ophthalmology Blue Journal, and then we were actually recently awarded a broad agency announcement contract with the FDA, which Dr. Abramoff will talk a little bit about, and hosted 4 international virtual conferences. This is a summary of some of those conferences. Our first one was held just in the throes of the COVID pandemic, had over 1,000 registrants from 6 continents around the world. As we grew from initially sort of this consortium, but not quite an entity, became an entity, had to start charging for registration. We had a little dip in registration, but then once we became a nonprofit and with the generous help of our sponsors, we are, our conference last year was over 1,100 registrants. Last year we actually had 7 continents represented, and we're growing, as I'll talk about some more. So now we have 8 publications that have come out, some of our conference work, and outside the conference work, and you can find them on our website. And here's a really important chart. So CCOI is a very flat organization, really centered around our working groups. We started with 6, as I mentioned, and actually in the last year or so, we've expanded to 16. So we've added 10 new working groups in the last year, and several of our working group leads are represented here, one of the many hats that they wear in their careers. And I'll just point out Dr. Jeff Goldberg is leading our new clinical trials working group. We have Dr. Natalie Afshari, who's leading our cornea and cataract working group, Dr. Ferrara, who's you heard from earlier today and several sessions, leading our low-middle income countries working group. And Dr. Abramoff leads our foundational principles of artificial intelligence working group. Dr. Mahajan from Stanford is also here, I think, and he helps co-lead our, Dr. Mahajan, our oculomics working group, which is a really, really hot topic, and many more. I encourage you, I'll talk a little about the conference later in this presentation, but a lot of really exciting work going on trying to move the needle in terms of innovation. I have the pleasure and honor to lead our education working group, and that's really education focused on trainees, really specifically the resident, fellow, postdoc sort of trainee level, and training that level, at that training level to learn how to innovate and learn really what are those obstacles, what are the things you have to think about, the regulatory science, there's a lot of it, and many of the things that people are learning here, even in a conference like this today. We've been running this for the past 5-6 years. Our program, the Ophthalmic Innovation Program, we were in our 9th, going on our 10th year. And this is the Li Ka-shing Center for Learning and Knowledge at Stanford School of Medicine. This is our past summer. Dr. Abramoff came and gave a wonderful presentation on his work on the IDX Linux core system. And the curriculum is founded on the core principles of the biodesign program, which was developed by Dr. Paul Yock and Dr. Makar at Stanford. And we use that as a framework for everything we do. So we have actually a formal fellowship that we teach one fellow every year, but also we open it up to not just our own residents and fellows, but also residents from all over the country and the world. And actually this, it's a highly internationally represented group here every summer. And so this is sort of at lockstep with CCOI, and so formally now we have an education working group that works together with what we have going on at Stanford as sort of the physical convening center of what is mostly a virtual organization. And actually Stanford we were the first convening center for the first CCOI meeting. A little bit more about this fellowship. So these are the fellows, our 9 fellows, now we're going on 10 on the top row, and then many distinguished mentors and visionary leaders in the group, including Byers himself, who is our named donor at Stanford, Dr. Eydelman, Dr. Ackerman, who was the founder of Tarsus. You might have heard about that today, and he's one of the directors at Biodesign. Dr. Adrian Graves and Dr. Emmett Cunningham, and you recognize other faces, Dr. Goldberg, of course. So, so this has been a wonderful thing to be working on together, and it's even more exciting working together with CCOI. I'm going to hand the mic over to Dr. Abramoff for the next few slides, because he's best suited to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks so much for listening to us. And one of the things that is new about CCOI, as you know, it's initiated by FDA, but actually it's an independent organization, so that needs to be very clear. But there is a funding mechanism that even I wasn't aware of more than 2 years ago. And actually, CCOI got funded to do research, in this case about social determinants of health and looking how AI is accessing potentially new populations in terms of social terms of health that have never been accessed before. So that research is ongoing. We actually just submitted the first progress report to FDA. And I expect this to have a major impact on, for example, clinical trial design and recruitment. That's definitely the plan. It's a 3-year project. And we intend to do more of these to sort of expand the work on CCOI. And then I also have the honor of leading what is called the Foundational Principles of AI work group. And we were just kidding a little bit that we should actually call it, since we changed the name of CCOI to a collaborative community for ophthalmic innovation from what was originally imaging, that we should call FPOA all innovation in healthcare. And so a little bit ambitious here, but indeed the plan was always to start from first principles, in this case for AI, base every regulatory consideration on ethics. So a lot of work was done, several papers have been published, both on, for example, if you are developing AI, what do you compare it to know whether the AI is correct or incorrect? I mean, there's a way of measuring how good your reference standard is, or what should be the endpoint for a clinical trial for for AI. How do you develop thinking and mechanisms so that the FDA, which is, and I want to make sure that's understood, I think the difference for what FDA traditionally did was very reactive. So you come in as a company or sponsor and say, hey, I want to make these claims for this product and I propose this trial. And then you go to back and forth, and it's very reactive from the side of FDA. And I think one of the things that the CCOI does, and definitely the FPOI does, is essentially be very proactive. Try to anticipate what we will need in the future for endpoints, for reference standards, for many, many other things, now both on the drug treatment and device side, and essentially think ahead, what do we need to see, what do we need to value it, etc. And so several papers have already been published. This is an interesting one where we looked at sources of bias in AI and how they can be addressed, and from the FDA's perspective, from a regulator's perspective. These are not regulations per se, these are considerations for regulation. So it's not at the level of that this is essentially mandatory for FDA to follow, but they are weighing heavily on what FDA does in terms of evaluating AIs. And then, for example, even reimbursement was based on this ethical framework and created together with CCOI. Do I have more slides? Sorry. Oh, no, okay, good. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Abramoff. And I'll expound on it during the panel discussion, but I do really feel that we owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. Abramoff for the trail that he blazed for us and for everyone in AI in our field. So another exciting thing we have going at CCOI is the new Stakeholder Council, which is kind of emblematic of the addressing challenges together mantra. So we have 90 plus Stakeholder Council members now, including OIS itself, just showing that what we're doing is really kind of orthogonal to what these other innovation-related meetings are, because we really want to get to that point, the sticking points of how to get innovation across the line. And this is just a geographical representation of our reach around the world, and we want to keep keep growing to other continents. So just a sneak peek to our upcoming conference in January. We have on 2 days in January 23rd, 24th, we have a session on generative AI, continuing on from our meeting from last year led by Dr. Aaron Lee. A new session, a new working group on myopia and myopia treatment by Dr. Ting and Dr. Repka. Oculomics by Dr. Mahajan and Dr. Carol Chung from Hong Kong, as I mentioned. Dr. Afshari is leading our cornea cataract session. Dr. Joyce Liao from Stanford is leading our neuro-ophthalmology and orbit working group and session. Vision restoration rehabilitation, such as retinal chips and so forth. Dr. Jose Sahel and Mark Humayun, two real trailblazers in this field. And then the first of the stakeholder panel, so basically a hot topics panel. This is inbound questions, hot topics that we are continuously soliciting from our stakeholders. The purpose of having this conference, having all the voices at the table, and Dr. Joel Schumann will be leading that. Day 2 will be led off by Dr. Abramoff. Then session 7 will be Carrie Getz from the NEI talking about imaging standards and interoperability, which is a huge issue and topic. Then vision assessment and outcome measures by Jose Sahel and Dr. Emily Chu. Then our what I call legacy work groups, fundus and retina by Dr. Chu, glaucoma by Ingeborg Stallmans, the question of whether ocular imaging is PHI or PII by Dr. Schumann and Chu, ocular oncology by Dr. Shields. Pediatrics was formerly the ROP working group, Dr. Michael Chang, and FPOAI by Dr. Michael Abramoff. And then Daniela or Dr. Ferrara will be leading our very exciting session on low middle income countries, and she's put together a very amazing, exciting, and global working group there. Dr. Abramoff will talk about regulatory challenges in our second stakeholder panel, again, live, inbound, hot topics on this, in this area. And Dr. Eydelman will be leading a session on regulation of ophthalmic medical products worldwide, so bringing regulators from not just the US, but outside the US. And then we'll close out the conference with a talk by Dr. David Rue from Microsoft. We hope you can join us for that meeting. So we'll stop talking and hand the mics over to all of us in the panel. Dr. Rothman?
Thanks, David. So thank you for that overview. And before we get into some of the meaty stuff, if possible, I would like for each of the panelists to kind of maybe introduce themselves and describe their role in CCOI and how they believe their work group is going to impact ophthalmic innovation. That's a big ask, right, to do in a couple of minutes, but I want to just echo Dr. Abramoff's commentary that this is not, that this entity was initiated by the FDA, but it is not required to follow the recommendations. But for everybody out here as an innovator, my perspective on what's going to happen here over time is that this group is going to be responsible for determining how you do your work. They're going to tell you exactly what your endpoints are. They're going to tell you exactly how to plan your clinical trials and how to prove what it is you want to prove. Take all the ambiguity out of how you present. So, you know, as was previously stated, this is going to be a much more proactive process rather than a reactive one by the FDA, and there's a lot of impacts that that's going to have. But we'll get to that individually. David, why don't you go first and tell everybody what group you're in charge of?
Yeah, I guess as the vice president, I'm the guy who steps in when the president can't be there. But actually, the big part, what I do is I'm kind of the de facto program chair, so help bring the program together and grow it. So I get to work with all the wonderful working group leaders, and then now morphing into the education working group. So.
And Michael, I think you gave us a little bit of an oversight, but just a rehash for the group, your roles. You have multiple responsibilities, so.
Yeah, so because I'm now the treasurer, I'm responsible for fundraising, which is an interesting new role. And as you saw with 90 stakeholders, we've become very ambitious. We hope to have 3 formal FDA workshops next year, which is a lot, and a lot of organizational effort. And so, yeah, we need. I need to look at the finances and make sure that all works. And like I said before, FPOI I think is very important for all the other work groups to organize their work around. And to give you an example, let's say there's a new work group for a specific type of disease, anterior segment, cornea, whatever, and typically the FDA hasn't made up its mind there about how to regulate maybe new drugs or new new endpoints for new devices. And so rather than FDA telling us what they want to see, which, if I can say so, typically they won't be comfortable with saying that because they do not know what the experts around the world think. Rather, a work group, a new work group would come up with, hey, what is important? What diseases do we think are going to be affected by new developments, new technology? And what should be the endpoints, like I said before, and essentially plan out what we're going to look at and what the FDA needs to be careful about, and make sure that there is buy-in from everyone around the world, that later on, when the FDA maybe approves something, someone somewhere says, well, I was never heard, and this is a terrible flaw in this approval. They don't like to see that. So I cannot speak on behalf of FDA or anyone on FPAOI, but I would like to stress how important this work is going to be.
Natalie?
Natalie Afshari. I am the chair of the Cornea and Cataract Committee of CCOI, and we have truly a global committee representing from Asia to Europe to Middle East to US, all over, and I'll talk about it a little more later, hopefully.
Thank you. I'm Daniela Ferrara. I'm the chair for the low and middle income countries. This is very close to my heart, way to serve CCOI as a Latina immigrant in the richest country in the world. I remain committed to serve the patients that go blind without having to go blind, and very grateful for this cross-functional, cross-industry committee. I also serve CCOI in the Stakeholder Council, which is a fantastic opportunity, similar to what we have here today, to have industry and FDA and NEI and different stakeholders in the same room, helping to shape this ecosystem of innovation.
Wonderful, thank you. Jeff Goldberg, and clinical trials is the newest, one of the newest domains within CCOI, and is also very much a cross-cutting area. And when Malvina and the leadership team asked me to step into it and to really think about, that's addressing the barriers, addressing how we do clinical trials, addressing how we think about clinical trials. Obviously, everyone in the innovation game, there's almost no innovation that gets to patient care without going through clinical trials process. And so really thinking about how do we address that? How do we think about that? What are the barriers that a startup is facing? What are the barriers that a very large, well-seasoned company is facing? Whether those barriers are understanding, demystifying costs, standardization, and the ability to influence the FDA in a positive way for our field so that all innovators and all startup companies and all seasoned companies benefit from simplifying the clinical trials process.
Thank you all for highlighting your groups. Jeff, I was going to stay with you for the first question because I think obviously you touched upon one that's sort of near and dear to the heart of most of the innovators in this room, which is how is it going to help the innovative life cycle to have standardization of clinical trials and endpoints? Because when I was first exposed to this, that to me was unbelievable, right? To think that anybody who wants to do a clinical trial for, let's just go to the hot topic, GA, right? There's going to be recommendations from the CCOI to the FDA on what it takes to be a successful therapeutic for GA, correct? That's a natural endpoint to think that's going to come out of this group. How's that going to change the innovative life cycle for companies?
Yeah, I would actually expand a little bit the way you're framing the question, because there's clearly a component of standardization, and I think, again, that's helping demystify. You've got your startup company, you're thinking about GA. Do you have to start from scratch on figuring out what your phase 3 would look like when you're still finishing preclinical work, and you're expected to be thinking about that phase 3 program when you're in the middle of your preclinical work, because ultimately your funding sources are going to care about that part of the story right from the beginning. You're going to care about that part of the story right from the beginning. And so having some standardized opportunities, I think, is one piece of it. But I think there's another really critical piece of it, and that's innovation in clinical trials, innovation in endpoint analysis, in creating new endpoints, and being able to adequately influence as a team together of interested stakeholders, be they scientists, academics, startups, strategics, VCs, et cetera, being able to work as a team to influence the FDA, for example, to accept new endpoints and to really build and describe the pathways that one innovates in creating new endpoints, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is, the crux of the importance here. Michael, can you possibly sort of just give us a little bit of insight about how startup companies you think are going to leverage benefits from this? Like, what is the process for these companies to sort of leverage this information? How do they get, a seat at the table maybe, or talking about these things in advance? Is there a pathway for them to access this information early on?
Yeah, I would, thanks for that question, join as a stakeholder for sure, or at least apply for that. I think it's all about scaling with a shorter runway. And I think runway is killing many innovations right now, and it's too long. And the hope is that rather than, again, like I said, being reactive, we can know where this needs to go. This is not replacement for the current process. If you're a startup and you want to do it in a very different way, you're free to do so and have your interactions for maybe 5 to 10 years, and maybe you will get somewhere. But maybe there's another way where working together we can make this much faster. And by the way, we have talked mostly about the FDA, but part of this is definitely also reimbursement. It's a big component here to make sure that the pathways to reimbursement, and there's now stakeholders who are involved with reimbursement, also get these what do we need to see on the innovation side to make this work? And so for a specific startup, I would say the shorter the runway, the better. The shorter, and for the patients, the sooner it gets to patients where it benefits them, the better. It's finally always about when the science is almost done, right? I mean, we are talking here about the path after the science is done. This is not Arvo Light. This is not the AAO. This is very different organization focused on getting from the science to patient benefit.
Natalie, there are a lot of different specialties, different areas of interest represented in this room. People looking at every aspect of ophthalmic disease. Are there specific subspecialties here that you think are going to benefit the most from this? Do you think that there are specific areas that are going to glean the most sort of immediate benefit from recommendations that come out of this group?
Great question, and I think every subspecialty will benefit from this, from standardizing and having more innovations. In cornea and cataract, in our committee, we have been working on more innovative diagnosis of corneal patients, both the difficult ones and the easier ones. For follow-up, also, that will help patients not only in developing countries, but also developed countries as well. And then standardizing the testing, and then some of the imaging metrics. And in cataract surgery and cataract, we have been working on both better diagnosis and grading, innovative techniques in that, as well as more accurate outcome measures that we can figure out from preoperative testing, and then also intraoperative warnings that the surgeons could have. And then all of that put together truly helps, first of all, every ophthalmologist, because first we all do, perhaps I'm a little biased, we all learn to do cataracts, and then we become subspecialized in retina, right, Michael? Or glaucoma, Jeff. But then truly every subspecialist will benefit from the innovations. And it is great that CCOI is so global that we have representatives from not only every subspecialty, but from so many different corners of the world. And then looking at the publications that represent the innovations, and then the editorials that are forthcoming, our group is working on one of those, will change the future of how we will be able to better serve patients in every corner of this country and the world.
And if I had to boil down the power of a collaborative community like this one, and I'm answering now not as a CCOI member, but as a drug developer, what we are trying to accomplish with standardization is mitigating risks, Because drug development is risky, innovation is risky, but as a community, if we agree with benchmarking the risks that are safe for patients to take, how to measure success, if we do this as a community, then it's easier to drive innovation because we are taking risks together.
I couldn't agree more. And since you brought it up, let's stay on that for a minute as it relates to drug development. I think, Michael's kind of made it very clear that there's a significant impact on AI going forward, not just on how we, not just the technology that's being developed, but how AI is being used to help develop that technology itself. And I think one of those issues is related to drug development, right? AI is now being used pretty heavily in the drug development space. Do you envision that there's going to be a CCOI recommendation on how we can accept AI-developed, concepts for drug?
It's happening. It's happening, and thanks to Michael's work and work for his committee and other committees, AI is changing drug development the way we do regular business, and it's not only changing the way we understand science, it's changing the behind the scenes, the operational pieces, so many levels of automation, but there are risks with innovation again. So again, CCOI has the ability to help us understand, and that's back to Michael's work, algorithm standards, validation, implementation, how to best make sure that patients' safety is preserved and the science is clear and transparent. And this is coming. And Michael shared today some of the publications that are already helping us to pave the way.
David, AI is kind of everywhere, right? I mean, it's all we hear, It's like the apoptosis of 2024 is AI, right? If you don't say AI, people don't think you know what you're talking about. So are there barriers for successful AI adoption in ophthalmology? I mean, what is your perception on what are the challenges here for us being able to use some of this incredible technology, both clinically in terms of, and even in getting the clinical trials done? I mean, where are the barriers here?
Yeah, and I've lived it at the privilege of being the end user, leading an AI-powered diabetic retinopathy screening program at Stanford. I launched the program initially as a telemedicine program, and then knew that IDX Luminex Core was coming down the pipeline, and anticipated trying to get it integrated. But we ran into barriers. FDA had approved in 2019, and in 2018, 2019, 2020 was when I was trying to push, hey, we need to get this AI software going. Oh, that's interesting. It's FDA approved, but is it reimbursed? We're like, not yet. And then like, does it meet quality measures? Not sure. But again, kudos and with great gratitude to Dr. Abramoff and the foresight. He was working on all those things along the way, and it was January of 2021 where the CPT code was announced, right? 92229. And so that was, I went to the administration and said, look, see, reimbursement. And then they're like, well, what about the quality? And I said, okay, well, what that means is that the quality metrics that primary care doctors are required to meet is to get their diabetic patients an eye exam. Well, that's out of their control, right? They have to refer them, and then the patient has to go see the doctor. And so how does this technology move that needle? And then in July of 2021, and Michael was telling me this was coming, and I wanted to believe him, but I had to see it, and they had to see it. It was published in the is it NCQA?
SQA.
Yeah, NCQA. There was a very large document, and like one line in that said that AI exam counts. Paraphrasing, AI exam is equivalent to a human physician exam, a diagnosis of images. So essentially, the first time in history, I think that AI was deemed to be equivalent to a human exam, and it checked the quality box. So so it said that the primary care doctor, if they got an AI exam in their office using this FDA-approved and reimbursed technology, it would fulfill the HEDIS measure. And from there, we started 4 cameras, 6 cameras, 7, 8, 9 cameras out all around the Bay Area. They all wanted it because now they were incentivized. Now those primary care doctors had a reason because it was going to help them deliver care better. Now, there's dots to be connected here because I first met Dr. Abramoff at what I call the beta or the pre-CCOI meetings that we were holding. The core group of us were meeting 2017, 2018, we're having meetings around digital health and AI. Dr. Eydelman was sort of kind of the powerhouse behind it. And we had a meeting, this was pre-FDA approval, Dr. Abramoff was giving a talk, and we were all discussing AI, and this was before anyone knew anything about it, and we were all saying, oh, it's gonna, is it gonna cannibalize our jobs, whatever. That meeting, Dr. Eydelman, and she's not here, but we can connect the dots back to that meeting, because after that meeting, within 6 to 12 months of that meeting, FDA approved the first AI, the Luminex Core technology, and then the other dominoes fell, as I mentioned. So this collaborative community effort, back then it was lowercase c, now it's uppercase C, collaborative community, works. It's a forum to get all the stakeholders together to have the discussion with the FDA and but also other stakeholders, regulators, reimbursement. And so I think what happened with AI is a blueprint for what can happen with other new technologies that are coming to the fore.
So it's interesting, there was I don't know how many of you saw it, but there was a survey that went out at some point from OIS to every attendee, and they asked you to provide some comments or thoughts about the FDA and AI. And shockingly, some of you are really potty mouths. I can't believe some of the commentary that came back about, as it related to the FDA and your particular anonymously voiced attitudes towards them as it relates to this issue. But good for you, because it kind of helps spur the conversation here. One of the themes that came up in multiple comments was that there are, let's say, non-critical decision support systems that utilize AI that are important for developing something. Michael, is that going to be a goal of the CCOI, to try and figure out how to evaluate some of these non-critical support systems? I mean, would you submit something to the FDA that utilized AI to get you an answer? Is that legitimate? How are these systems going to be evaluated when it comes to submission to the FDA, do you think?
So I cannot speak on behalf of FDA. It needs to be very clear. And also the CCOI is not, like I said, it's initiated by FDA, but it's not dependent on FDA. And so absolutely, I think to preserve, there's a lot of evidence now that AI is really better in some cases for patients, better for outcomes, health equity, productivity, etc. There's always, if it's done poorly, and this has happened, where patients have been damaged by bad AIs, paper in Science a few years ago, and that affects all AI. It's still not the case where maybe if you think back to when cars were first invented and were starting to drive around and Ford manufactured them, at the time, if a car made a bad accident, people might say, we don't want any cars. Now, if some car is bad, people say, I won't buy that brand of car. Today, it's still the case a little bit that it's not yet, oh, if there's a bad AI, we won't buy those bad AIs anymore, we won't deploy these anymore. It's, oh, all AI is dangerous and bad, let's not do it altogether. You hear that in Congress a lot. And you see that in some agencies as well. And so I think we still need to be careful, and that's why I care greatly about where FDA has no authority, where maybe the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has authority about consumer safety. All these AIs that are maybe in Epic and other, decision support systems, to ideally at least evangelize that, there's ways where we can make sure these are safe, and at least educate people who are developing these systems that, hey, it can be done the right way, and let's be careful. Because if there's too much damage done, literally the example I gave, and then I will shut up, but there was this paper in Science by Zaid Oberman at Berkeley, and he did this great study of a payer-created AI that essentially determined pathways for patients with lung disease. And it was shown that this AI was biased and was harming black patients. And it got them the publication, and it led literally to the Office of Civil Rights within HHS, making a new rule that is now essentially saying if any provider uses technology that is known to be biased, that's a civil rights violation. You get in a lot of trouble. And it is essentially because of that one study, that one bad AI, that was entirely out of the purview of FDA. So we need to get it right, and definitely I see the work of CCOI as extending across all innovation in healthcare.
I just want to be clear, nobody said anything bad about you. It was all about Malvina. Just so you know. just so you know. Danielle, you have something?
I want to build on Michael's considerations because this is truly transformative. We, all physicians in this room, take pride of practicing evidence-based medicine, and the way we do that is looking to the literature and large population studies, and clinical trials are the anchor of evidence-based medicine. However, it's been a challenge to translate what we see in a clinical trial because all images are graded by someone and all measurements are acquired by someone. And then we have the publications, and then we all have to translate what the clinical trial output shows us to the patient sitting in front of us. Now, for the first time, using those algorithms, the measurements we're doing in drug development, the same tool will be available to all of us at the point of care. That never happened before. And the translation, if it's done with tools that are well validated and transparent and trustworthy, then it's supposed to help us all. But that's the challenge, is to translate what we're seeing in a clinical trial with a trustworthy, transparent tool to the point of care. And that's how CCOI will step up.
Great point, Danielle. And to that point, the amount of information is just massive that's out there. And it's impossible for everybody to be an expert in everything anymore. So we do need the help of AI and other technology to just help the average doctor in future that is seeing a patient to help more number of patients, because as you said, not everybody would have the expertise of grading that particular fundus or corneal image and say the best possible treatment would be this because there is this microscopic difference, and therefore AI will truly help.
Yeah.
I'll just add in the context of, from the perch of clinical trials, I think, there's really a bidirectional element that we're, really digging into as a field in medicine, obviously in ophthalmology leading the way. One is the slightly more trivial side of things, which is how do we do clinical trials to validate AI? And, once again in ophthalmology, we get to pat all of ourselves on the back for being the most innovative field in medicine, first tissue transplants, first lasers in medicine, first gene therapy in medicine, now first AI in medicine. I'm sure that list will go on from there. How do we properly do clinical trials on an AI assistive device, for example? I think that's sort of maybe the more obvious way to think about it. But it also goes in the other direction. How do we use AI to run clinical trials? There's a lot of interest around digital twinning and things like that, ways that we can actually create a digital environment that helps us accelerate particularly early phase trials. We know that we know that we've got very large investment now in companies using AI to go out to pick targets to go after, to design the drugs that hit those targets, but moving that to the natural next step of how do we use and implement AI to facilitate early phase clinical trials, accelerate those trials, pick the right patients for those trials perhaps, do some of those trial work in silico itself. I think that's really a coming next step, and again, collaborating as a group to address that and distribute that kind of thinking across the innovation field is going to sort of rise all boats together.
So I'm going to ask a selfish question to you, Jeff, because as a clinically practicing glaucoma specialist, I've been anxiously waiting for AI to take my job, but it hasn't happened yet. Do you foresee the recommendations from this entity being able to facilitate the development of more rapid access into the clinical space? Do you think that recommendations from this panel will shorten the timeline that it takes to get things done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think about the time that we spend collecting data on a patient, multimodal data right now in glaucoma, where you're getting multiple different kinds of OCTs and corneal thickness and visual fields and fundus photography, and then you've got a human being really working to synthesize that. And I think we're really right on that edge right now of being able to have the computer tell us not just who needs to come, not just who has glaucoma with some of that data available, but even who out on the street needs to come in and get any additional testing to be screened for glaucoma, for example. And then from there, who has glaucoma that we don't have to worry about? Who has glaucoma that needs more aggressive intervention? And the idea of reducing your practice my practice, to really just the patients who need it most, who might not even be accessing care today. That's really, I think, a fantastic future. Is AI going to replace our ability to surgically take care of the patients? I don't think we're right on that edge yet. But the diagnosis, prognosis, getting patient access solved, I think that's all going to be spots that are going to really accelerate and simplify our practices.
So you guys, everybody here on the panel knows who's here. You know who in the audience that had never heard about CCOI should be getting involved? What should they be doing to try and figure out how important this information is to them? Is there ways, Michael, for them to kind of be part of this process, to at least, besides going to the conference in January or registering, which is a virtual conference, by the way, what should they be doing? How should the audience react to this?
It's partially a policy question. So that, again, the stakeholder council was created to have more input from industry rather than I'm industry, and I was a little bit worried it would be too much about the science and not much about new products. And so definitely approaches, I would say. I don't think I know exactly what is the criteria for becoming an additional stakeholder anymore. So it's
Yeah, well, the stakeholder council is just being formed. I think we'll be discussing it, but I think the general consensus is that we're doing it together. So I think you can inquire, and I think definitely just inquire about becoming a stakeholder, and you'll be responded to accordingly. Yeah. Because it really takes, I don't think we have yet the global representation, for instance, and also across the different stakeholder verticals, industry. I think that flywheel, there are some that are more prescribed than others, represented than others. So yeah, please do.
And what about the output? The articles that are published?
Before you go on, there's another thing, which is the work groups. And so the work groups have their own membership, right? The stakeholders sort of more steer what do we do next. The work groups have their own, essentially, charter. And then I would say, if you're interested in one thing, reach out to the charter lead. I'm not trying to make more work for you guys.
No, it's perfect. Exactly. I think besides the publications that come out, the working groups are interested in some data sets that the different companies may have, and image sets, all of those to really enhance the models and enhance not only just AI, but other innovative factors, standardization, and moving forward. So please reach out to us. We have different committee members from different groups.
There's even another level. So there's stakeholder council, it's typically more organizational level involvement, and then there's major working group, which is a little more get rolled up your sleeves and work with the session leaders. And again, 10 of them are new in this year, so there's still room for growth. And then third is just input, right? So at the conference, we have sort of a portal by which just anyone who's registered for the conference wants to put in a question. Maybe it's not answered right away during the session, but they are live sessions, so some of them can be answered by the expert panels, but then some can be answered afterwards or through a publication or so forth. So really the big message is that CCOI is listening, and so feel free to chime in.
Daniela, how about outside the United States? What do you think about the impact of this group outside the US? Do you think that this group's going to have a global reach with regard to these processes? Is it going to standardize some of the work, not just here, but abroad?
Absolutely. Well, that's the goal. And when we think about the low and middle income countries, there's so many very concrete challenges to make sure the patients are better treated, and people that don't need to go blind don't go blind. So we're thinking about a multi-pronged approach that anyone in this room can and should support. One of those approaches would be in medical education. We need to make sure that the innovation that's driven in America can reach different countries and different patient populations. Another approach is to engage regulators globally, so we also count on many people in this room to help us to have those conversations. And the third and very obvious one is driving science on itself, which again, from having diverse patient populations in clinical trials, that we can be sure that new medications are safe and efficacious for different patient populations, all the way to making sure that those innovations or new devices really reach all countries globally. So adding to what the panelists said, it's please reach out, we do need help.
It's really an area where access to information it becomes a really big facilitator. And so, I think a different way to phrase your original question for anyone in the room is like, how do I extract some value for myself out of CCOI? And I think that's exactly what CCOI is building itself to become, which is a value source, which is, hey, I've got a new idea, I've got a new drug or device idea that I want to innovate on, I want to bring this forward, whether it's in the US or in a different country, whether it's for this population of patients or that population of patients. How do we sort of make it really easy for them to reach out to CCOI and say, hey, what are the standards for a clinical trial in this space? What are the standards for product distribution in this space? What are the standards? And having that kind of standardization and access to information. And even if it's not, hey, I don't want to know what the standard is, I want to know how I can get this new idea done. I want to know how I can do a clinical trial in a low and middle income country because I'm going to try to target something somewhere else. Having access to a whole community who can be your sort of pilot team or co-pilot team and put together new standards, approaches, best practices, instead of saying, well, I guess I'll try to hire 3 KOLs and 2 regulatory consultants. Now you've got a very large collaborative community that can step into some of those roles and provide information, demystify, paint a path forward.
Yeah, and I also want to mention in terms of as a repository and work product, so all CCOI meetings are recorded, both the talks and the panel, the live panels, and they're posted online for free, so essentially open source material. So all CCOI's learnings and discussions are open source, so back to 2020, and every meeting is free, so registration is free, access to the meeting in retrospect is free. So the barrier to learning, for instance, in this area is nil. You just come and you can just participate, go on a run, listen to whatever you want to do. Just you can soak it all in. So that's like the base level way to be involved is just be part of it.
You can even have your AI listen to the whole meeting and
That's right.
summarize it for you.
That's correct. Actually, someone please do that. I'd like to see what that transcript looks like.
Next time you're going to get an AI me, be much more exciting. I think the last question that I think should be answered is this is it's an amazing undertaking, and I think everybody who's listening now understands the importance of the group and the effort that's being put in by all of these people to try and do this work. What has the FDA's response been to prior collaborative committees in terms of their recommendations? Anybody aware of how closely they follow some of these recommendations? I mean, they know they're not obliged to. I know they're not mandated to do anything, but we're one of 16 communities now. So what has been the response to these communities from the FDA as it relates to non-ophthalmology?
I think I can answer part of that. I also wear different hats, and I am the chair of FDA committee of ASCRS, American Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgery, for the past several years. And FDA, along with several organizations, has had some of these meetings several years ago. I think, David, you were there. One of them was on myopia progression. How could we stop myopia progression? And it involved multiple groups and AAO and ASCRS and 10, 12 organizations. And FDA took all of that and really was quite receptive. So to answer your question, is FDA receptive to all of these suggestions? Yes, and that was the goal. They truly wanted to know what else to do, what standards should be considered for that. And there were a couple other workshops. David can talk perhaps more about that.
I can't answer that so directly, but I do know that over the past year or two that we've been people referred to us who are either trying to start their collaborative community or have already formed it and how to build it. And so, and these are outside of ophthalmology. This is microbiology and some other, one of the 19 that I mentioned. You can look on the website, there's about 19 of them. So we've spoken with several of them and just kind of helping each other at sort of the FDA's sort of referral recommendation to kind of help build it because they think it's of value.
Well, I want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing on the CCOI. As I've gotten more, aware of the existence and have gotten involved personally in the hot topic session, it's incredible to see the effort that's being put in that you all do for the continuation of innovation. And I think ultimately that's what this is going to result in, is improvements and facilitation of innovation inside of our space. So I encourage all of you to do some homework, look into the CCOI, use the information that they provide for your own work, because it will be invaluable to you as you get closer to the FDA. Thank you all, and again, thanks to the CCOI committee members.